Black CEO denied first-class meal, fires entire crew minutes after landing. Have you ever witnessed a moment so shocking it made the entire world around you freeze in disbelief? Picture a lavish first-class cabin at 35,000 feet, where tensions simmer beneath polished smiles and clinking champagne flutes. Out of nowhere, a single refusal sparks an uproar, revealing buried prejudices, hidden alliances, and unstoppable forces of power. At the heart of it all stands a distinguished black entrepreneur, denied the basics of luxury he rightfully purchased. But when his silent fury ignites, destinies collide in epic fashion. Buckle up. This isn't your typical airline drama. It's a journey of ambition, vengeance, and unforeseen repercussions. Devin Blackwood was used to a life of subtle glances and hushed judgments. As one of the few black CEOs in the tech industry, he'd learned to navigate racial biases with calm composure, letting success speak louder than any insult. His multinational company, Astrovale Technologies, partnered with major businesses across the globe. Devin had defied stereotypes every step of the way, building a reputation as a force of nature. Unapologetically black, fiercely intelligent, and passionately driven. He was heading from New York to London for an urgent business meeting with a major investment firm, Goldman Sachs, which was heavily interested in his firm's new satellite communication systems. Securing this partnership would catapult Astrovale to the next echelon of tech superpowers, a competitor to giants like SpaceX and NASA in terms of pioneering technology. As soon as Devin arrived at JFK International Airport, he was ushered through priority security lines, courtesy of his first-class ticket on British Airways Flight BA-178. The hustle and bustle of the terminal whirled around him as he settled into the exclusive first-class lounge. There in the lounge, he sipped a cappuccino, reviewing last-minute briefs on his smartphone. News flashes displayed on the television screens overhead, economic changes, tech updates, and ironically, a debate about diversity within corporate leadership. Occasionally, a curious passerby glanced his way, no doubt recognizing his face from magazine covers or business news segments. Devin had grown used to these stolen looks, some admiring, others suspicious. But that morning, the atmosphere felt different. There was an unspoken tension in the air he couldn't quite put his finger on. Within the lounge, a steward approached to confirm that Devin was comfortable. With a polite smile, the steward noted his flight would begin boarding soon. Devin nodded in gratitude. Everything seemed in order. He was thinking about the upcoming meeting in London, double-checking he had all the essential documents. He was also mentally preparing for the intense negotiations on the horizon. After finishing his cappuccino, he gathered his carry-on, a sleek, dark leather bag embossed with his initials DB, and headed toward the boarding gate, the lounge staff wishing him a pleasant flight. The first-class cabin of British Airways was as swanky as he remembered. Wide seats that could convert into flatbeds, personal storage compartments, and a lavish menu curated by a Michelin-starred chef. Devin settled into seat 1A. This wasn't his first time flying first class. He was no stranger to the lifestyle of the ultra-successful. Yet he never took the privilege for granted. Every success had been earned through sleepless nights and relentless determination. Across the aisle sat a middle-aged couple who looked up from their matching laptops long enough to give Devin a cursory once-over. He offered a friendly nod. The woman returned a tight smile. The man barely acknowledged him. Devin shrugged inwardly. He'd long learned not to internalize cold receptions. Often they were simply uncertain how to engage with a figure like him, or it could be unconscious bias. He turned his attention to the flight attendant, a well-groomed man named Jacob, who was introducing himself to each first-class passenger with elaborate warmth. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Blackwood. We're thrilled to have you," Jacob said, offering a handshake. "We have a wonderful selection of pre-flight beverages. May I get you a glass of champagne or perhaps orange juice?" "Champagne would be lovely," Devin replied with a calm smile. Jacob poured the effervescent liquid into a crystal flute, presenting it delicately. Devin thanked him. He allowed himself a sip, letting the bubbles tickle his throat as they settled. Next to arrive was the in-flight service manager, Catherine Harding, a statuesque woman with a sharp professional demeanor. She approached with all the grace and courtesy one expects in first class, introducing herself with a practiced warmth. "Mr. Blackwood, welcome. If you need anything at all, additional pillows, special meal requests, or even if you're unsatisfied with your seat temperature, do not hesitate to let me know," she said, emphasizing each word with a broad smile. Devon nodded politely. His mind was drifting to that day's negotiation. He tried to quell the anxiousness stirring in his stomach. This deal was monumental, and he had to remain focused. What he didn't realize was that an altogether different kind of negotiation was about to happen right here in the skies. A negotiation for respect, for dignity, and for personal vindication. Soon the plane taxied from the gate and soared into the morning sky. Devon felt the subtle hum and vibration of the powerful Rolls-Royce engines under his seat, a vibration that was comforting in its familiarity. He reclined slightly, skimming over the airline's glossy menu. Rare caviar amuse-bouches, lobster thermidor, and an assortment of fine wines from Bordeaux to Napa. The dessert menu boasted handcrafted chocolates made in Switzerland. Devon prepared to order, but from the corner of his eye he caught the flight attendants exchanging peculiar glances. He couldn't quite parse their meaning. Maybe they were short-staffed, or maybe a VIP was on board. Either way, something felt slightly off. Nonetheless, he brushed away the thought and sank into his seat, letting the flight pass smoothly for the next hour. At cruising altitude, the cabin lights adjusted to a dim, soothing glow. Some first-class passengers took naps, while others watched films on their private screens. Devon took the opportunity to review some financial statements. The flight attendants began circulating with the meal service, handing out the day's menu. Jacob, the smiling steward, returned to Devon's seat. "Mr. Blackwood, are you ready for lunch?" Jacob asked. "I am, thank you," Devon replied, setting aside his iPad. "I'd love to start with the caviar amuse-bouche, and then the lobster thermidor as my main course." Jacob's smile faltered. "Lobster thermidor. Let me check our supply." With that, he gave a polite nod and disappeared behind the curtain separating the galley from the first-class cabin. Moments later, a different flight attendant, a woman named Carla, arrived. She seemed nervous as she cleared her throat. "Mr. Blackwood, I'm so sorry, but there's been a slight oversight. We only have one lobster thermidor left and it has been reserved for another passenger." Devon's eyebrows rose. "Reserved for another passenger? I wasn't aware there was a reservation system for meals in first class." Carla mustered a shaky smile, her eyes darting briefly around the cabin. "There's usually not. This is an exception. Another passenger has a dietary restriction, and it's the only main course that meets his needs." He tried to remain composed. "All right. I understand dietary restrictions. Could I have the seared lamb then?" Carla nodded. "Yes, of course. Let me note that down." She disappeared, her footsteps echoing on the plush aisle carpeting. Devon felt the sting but told himself not to jump to conclusions. Perhaps it was genuinely a dietary restriction issue. He recalled a time when shrimp was the only shellfish option for a passenger allergic to everything else. Mistakes happen. He returned to reading, pushing aside a mild sense of annoyance. About 10 minutes later, Carla returned, balancing a tray that carried a starter salad, some bread, and caviar. Devon noticed something amiss. The caviar portion looked decidedly smaller than usual, almost half the size of what he saw placed in front of other passengers. He drew in a deep breath, deciding it wasn't worth confrontation. But the flicker of disappointment refused to leave him. First class was expensive, and more importantly, there was an unspoken understanding of courtesy and fairness. He didn't expect special treatment, he just expected equal treatment. He decided to focus on the caviar's taste, letting the briny pearls burst on his tongue. But the seed of doubt grew within him, fed by the flight attendant's peculiar, guarded looks. Something was not right. When the main course was served, Devon looked around. Some first-class passengers were receiving sizzling steaks on bone china plates, while others had succulent lobster. When Carla placed his dish down, Devon saw not the expected seared lamb, but a less appetizing alternative. A generic chicken entree typically served in economy or premium economy. Before Devon could question it, Carla was gone, vanishing into the galley. He stared at the bland dish, rolling the facts through his mind. He pressed the call button. A different flight attendant, a young man named Nish, responded. "Is something wrong, Mr. Blackwood?" Devon pointed to the plate in front of him. "I was expecting seared lamb, but I've been given chicken." Nish's face tightened with discomfort. "We ran out of the lamb as well, sir. I'm afraid the only available option left was chicken. Sincere apologies." Devon looked around the spacious cabin. It was first class, and typically they have enough high-end meals for each passenger, especially since they know exactly how many seats are booked. He glanced over to see the man across the aisle, the one who had barely acknowledged him earlier, cutting into a sumptuous piece of lamb. Another passenger on the opposite end had just been served the lobster. Suddenly, the talk of dietary restriction rang hollow in Devon's ears. His pulse quickened, anger surging into his chest. He could feel the eyes of a few curious onlookers. He inhaled, determined to keep himself level-headed. "Nish, could I please speak to your in-flight service manager, Catherine Harding?" Nish nodded, face colored by worry. Moments later, Catherine, the tall service manager, arrived with the slightly flustered Carla in tow. "Yes, Mr. Blackwood? We're truly sorry for the inconvenience. How can we make this right?" Catherine asked, using her polished customer service tone. Devon pointed at the meal. "I'd specifically requested the lamb, and earlier I was told I couldn't have the lobster due to a dietary restriction from another passenger. Now, there's no lamb left, and I've been offered only a chicken dish that's clearly not from the first-class menu. I paid for a first-class experience. Could you please explain what's going on?" Catherine paused for a fraction of a second. Something in her expression seemed to tremble. "Mr. Blackwood, we had a slight miscalculation in our catering. We're short on certain meals, we apologize. If you'd like something else, we can check business class or even see if we can prepare something different." Devon's frustration rose. "Why is it that I've been the only one denied 2 premium meal options? I'm noticing that no one else seems to have this problem." Carla and Catherine exchanged glances. Catherine forced a sympathetic smile that did not reach her eyes. "We'll do our best to rectify this." The moment felt like an eternity. Passengers in first class darted furtive looks in Devon's direction, as if trying to gauge whether they should get involved. Finally, Devon said, "Look, I'll eat the chicken. Just let's move on." Catherine breathed a sigh of relief, as though she had dodged a bullet. She produced an overly sweet smile. "Let me at least get you another glass of champagne, Mr. Blackwood," she said before directing Carla to retrieve it. Devon nodded wordlessly, fists tightening around his napkin. On the surface, it seemed like a minor inconvenience, meal choices running out, but the subtle humiliations, the sideways stares, and the way the flight attendants hadn't even tried to rectify the problem for him specifically told him something else. He had encountered such disguised microaggressions before, and he was seldom wrong in sensing them. Dinner service ended, and as the flight settled into the halfway mark over the Atlantic, Devon tried to distract himself with a movie. It was a thriller set in the financial world, ironically echoing his own real-life dealings. However, he couldn't shake his irritation. Every time he rang the call button for a small request, water, a second pillow, he noticed hesitations from the attendants, as though they had to mentally check some unspoken directive before serving him. Meanwhile, the other first-class passengers kept receiving prompt attention, from frequent drink refills to extra blankets. Devon tried his best to ignore it, to not make assumptions, but the pattern was too blatant to dismiss. He was a paying passenger in the most luxurious cabin, yet he was being treated like an afterthought. Eventually, he decided to walk to the galley and speak with Catherine in private. He found her chatting quietly with Carla near a service trolley, their voices hushed. As soon as they spotted him, they snapped upright, forced smiles plastered on their faces. "Mr. Blackwood, how may we help you?" Catherine asked, her voice tinged with guarded tension. "I just wanted to speak with you privately. Could we maybe step aside?" he requested calmly. Catherine's eyes flickered to Carla, then back to Devon. She nodded and led him a few feet away, behind a partition where they had a semblance of privacy. The nearby hum of the airplane engines provided a low, constant background noise that swallowed any chance of eavesdropping by passengers. Devon took a measured breath. "Catherine, I'd like to know plainly why I'm encountering these problems today. Being denied meal choices, the strange looks, the delays in service. Is there an issue with me personally?" Catherine's mouth opened, then closed. She hesitated, as though weighing how honest she could afford to be. "Mr. Blackwood, I assure you, we treat all our first-class passengers equally. It's just an unfortunate day where the catering has been subpar, and the staff is under pressure to ensure everyone is satisfied. We apologize if you felt neglected. It was certainly not our intention." He locked eyes with her. "Right, not your intention," he echoed. She offered another fixed smile. "Is there anything I can do right now to improve your experience?" Devon studied her face, searching for any genuine remorse or sincerity, and found only a polished veneer. "I'd just like a fair experience, Catherine, that's all. Nothing special, nothing more. Fairness." He returned to his seat, trying to push aside the sour taste in his mouth. The next few hours ticked by in a blur of faint cabin lights and restless dozing. Occasionally a voice on the intercom announced turbulence, or that seatbelts should remain fastened. Devon tried to rest, but a persistent sense of injustice gnawed at him. He replayed the incident over and over, each repetition stoking the embers of anger in his chest. Finally, the cabin lights brightened as the flight neared London. A gentle voice over the PA system announced they'd soon be descending into Heathrow. Devon stretched and watched the sun rise through the window, peach and lavender streaks coloring the horizon. No matter how many times he flew, the dawn from 35,000 feet always awed him. He just wished the flight had gone differently, that he could have admired this moment without feeling the sting of discrimination. Upon landing, the cabin's hush turned into quiet chatter as seatbelts unfastened. The plane taxied to the gate. Devon's thoughts pivoted to his urgent meeting with Goldman Sachs. He needed to brush off this unpleasant flight experience, focusing on the bigger picture of sealing the deal that could secure Astrovale's future. But, as fate would have it, something else was about to transpire. Catherine stood at the front of the cabin, offering polite goodbyes to each first-class passenger as they disembarked. When Devon stepped into the aisle, she gave him a rehearsed smile. "Have a wonderful day, Mr. Blackwood." He gazed at her for a moment, a flurry of emotions in his eyes. Indignation, disappointment, fatigue. He nodded curtly and walked on. The rest of the flight attendants avoided eye contact, busying themselves with typical post-flight tasks. Devon managed to compose himself enough to exit the aircraft with dignity. He entered the jet bridge and strode toward the terminal, determined to leave it all behind, for now. But as he passed through the corridors, his smartphone vibrated in his pocket. Glancing at the screen, he saw an urgent message from an Astrovale board member. "Urgent. The British Airways contract for in-flight communication systems is on the table today. They're calling for an immediate demonstration. They want to finalize the partnership with Astrovale. We've arranged a meeting at their London HQ. They're expecting you." Devon froze. British Airways was in advanced talks with Astrovale about equipping their entire fleet with next-generation satellite communication systems. If successful, it would be one of Astrovale's most profitable collaborations yet, cementing them as a global leader. The synergy made sense. Astrovale had top-tier tech, and BA needed an upgrade to stay competitive. Taking a slow breath, Devon realized the crew he had just interacted with, Catherine, Carla, Nish, and Jacob, worked for the same airline that was courting his technology. A flicker of anger reignited. He typed a quick response to the board member. "I'll be there. Have the demonstration ready." The irony was palpable. Here he was, a paying first-class customer, treated like a second-class citizen. In a matter of hours, That same airline's senior leadership would be eagerly hoping he would finalize a contract worth millions, perhaps more. In that moment, Devon decided to do something he'd never done before, not simply ignore the injustice. He pressed the phone to his ear and dialed the number of a longtime ally at British Airways, Margaret Ainsley, an executive who'd played a part in forging the partnership. She answered promptly. "Devon, darling, I'm so glad you've arrived safely." Margaret's cheerful voice greeted him. "Are you ready for our big day? The board can't wait to see what Astrovale has in store." He forced a tight smile no one could see. "Margaret, I'm well enough, but something highly concerning happened on my flight here." "Oh dear, what do you mean? Is everything all right?" "Not exactly. I'd rather talk in person. Is there a chance I can see you before the presentation?" Margaret's tone instantly shifted to seriousness. "Yes, of course. Let me make arrangements. Come to my office at the BA headquarters in Waterside near Heathrow." Devon thanked her and ended the call. He made his way through the arrivals lounge, collected his luggage, and quickly slipped into a car waiting curbside. As the London traffic swelled around them, Devon stared out the window at the city's sprawl, mind racing with the possible repercussions of what he was about to do. The British Airways corporate campus, known as Waterside, sat near Heathrow, a sprawling modern building reflecting water features and sleek mirrored facades. A calm pond and carefully curated landscaping gave the impression of a forward-thinking enterprise. Devon's car pulled up to the entrance, and a sharply dressed receptionist guided him to an elevator that rose to the executive floor. Margaret Ainsley greeted him in the hallway, her steel-gray hair pinned in a neat chignon, her expression warm yet tinged with worry. "Devon." She extended her hand. "Let's talk in my office." He nodded politely. In her office, the modern design continued. Floor-to-ceiling windows with a view of the manicured grounds, contemporary artwork on the walls, and a large glass desk. Margaret gestured for him to sit on a stylish leather chair. She took the seat behind her desk, leaning forward attentively. "What happened?" she asked softly. Devon recounted everything, from the moment he tried to order lobster thermidor to the humiliating denial of a proper meal and the blatant microaggressions. Margaret's face changed from concern to outrage and back again. She took notes, occasionally shaking her head in disbelief. "I cannot believe this happened in our first-class cabin," she said, voice laced with anger. "Devon, please accept my apologies on behalf of the airline. We pride ourselves on offering top-tier service, especially to our first-class customers. And you, as a valued partner, should never have been subjected to such treatment." "I appreciate that, Margaret, but I didn't come here to be appeased. I came here because I believe it's critical for British Airways to address this issue at the highest level, publicly. And I want to ensure this never happens to anyone else." Margaret nodded, looking troubled. "I'll ensure the crew is reprimanded, Devon. But let's be honest, this is about more than punishing a few flight attendants. There's a cultural problem here, possibly unconscious bias or worse. BA can't afford a scandal of this magnitude. We're in the middle of major expansions and can't risk negative press." Devon leaned back, crossing his arms. "I'm not interested in making a public spectacle, if it can be resolved genuinely and effectively. But I am prepared to walk away from the satellite communication deal if British Airways doesn't address this swiftly and transparently." Margaret's eyes widened. "That's billions in potential revenue for both our companies. The board will be frantic if you threaten to withdraw the technology deal." He didn't budge. "Then they'd better address the racism that creeps into their first-class cabin. Period." She nodded again, steepling her fingers. "Let me call an emergency meeting with the board. We'll bring in the appropriate department heads, and we'll bring in the in-flight manager who can identify the crew members. We'll get to the bottom of this, I promise you." Devon exhaled, tension still coiled within him. Yet he felt relief that someone at the top was taking him seriously. Together, they left her office for a large windowless boardroom with a sprawling walnut conference table. Seated inside were half a dozen BA executives, each with perfectly tailored suits and poised expressions. When Margaret introduced Devon, they stood and greeted him with firm handshakes. They peppered him with apologies and immediate expressions of regret. Devon maintained a professional demeanor, methodically detailing the incident as they took notes. An executive named Henry Crawley, whose title was Chief Customer Officer, insisted they implement immediate changes. Another, Wei Ling, from the Diversity and Inclusion Department, looked mortified as she promised new training modules for staff. The synergy in the room felt like crisis mode. Everyone recognized that Devon had the power to scuttle a major deal that BA desperately needed for their upcoming fleet upgrade. At the height of the discussion, Margaret discreetly stepped out to make a phone call. She returned moments later with a satisfied nod. "Devon, the crew in question landed with you an hour ago. They're on a break in the staff lounge area. If you want to speak with them personally, we can facilitate that." Devon froze. He hadn't expected a face-to-face confrontation so soon. Part of him wanted the airline to handle it internally. Why subject himself to another round of tension? But another part, the part that was wounded and outraged, demanded accountability. "Let's do it," Devon finally said, voice firm. The executives escorted him to a more intimate conference room. Devon waited there while they summoned the flight crew. Margaret stood at his side, whispering reassurances. A few minutes passed before the door opened, revealing Catherine, Jacob, Carla, and Nish. None of them expected to see Devon in that room. Their jaws slackened in shock. Clearly, they'd been told an executive meeting required their presence, but they had not been informed of the exact nature of the meeting. Margaret stepped forward. "Thank you for coming. This is Mr. Devon Blackwood, a first-class passenger from this morning's flight BA 178, and one of our most important business partners. He has expressed grievances about the service and treatment he received on board. We're here to address them directly." Catherine's face turned ashen. She glanced at Devon, then at the cluster of executives, clearly realizing the gravity of the situation. Jacob and Carla squirmed, while Nish stared at the floor, cheeks blazing. Devon cleared his throat, locking eyes with Catherine. "I want to hear from you why I was denied my rightful first-class meal choices. Why was I given an economy meal? Why was my service consistently delayed? I'd like to know, was it an honest mistake, or was there something more insidious going on?" Catherine took a shaky step forward. "Mr. Blackwood, there was a mix-up with the catering logs, He cut her off gently. "The same logs that somehow allowed everyone else to get their chosen meal. The same logs that gave me leftover chicken." Catherine winced. Jacob interjected. There was a request from the passenger in 2B that took the last lobster. A request we had to honor because of dietary reasons." Devon fixed him with a steely gaze. "And the lamb. How did that also disappear in a first-class cabin with fewer than a dozen seats?" Jacob's words dried up. Carla spoke, voice trembling. "We were told, by the head purser, that if a certain passenger in seat 2B or 3E requested a meal, we should prioritize them. They're apparently high-value frequent flyers, so when we realized we were short, we had to reassign the lobster and the lamb to them." Devon's chin lifted. "And that passenger in seat 2B, did they even have the dietary restriction you claimed?" Carla's gaze fell. "No, sir, they did not." Tension pressed into the room like a heavy weight. Margaret's expression darkened as she turned to Catherine. "So you lied to a first-class passenger. Worse than that, you singled him out. Why? Why Devon Blackwood? Because you didn't recognize him? Because you thought he wasn't high value enough? Or was it something else altogether?" Catherine's hands fluttered. "We didn't know who he was. Normally we cater to specific frequent flyer statuses first. We shouldn't have lied, but we didn't think it'd become such a big issue." She paused, her voice dropping. "It's just the way we've been trained. When in doubt, prioritize certain passengers who might cause trouble if they don't get what they want." "Passengers who might cause trouble?" Devon echoed, raising an eyebrow. "Did you assume I wouldn't cause trouble? Or did you assume I couldn't? Why lie to me about a dietary restriction?" No one answered. A thick silence settled in. The pressure in the air seemed to vibrate with unspoken truths, Racial bias, favoritism, prejudice hidden behind a veneer of corporate courtesy. Margaret, voice tight, said, "Catherine Harding, you were the lead of this flight's first-class cabin, correct?" Catherine nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Margaret glanced at the rest of the airline executives, then at Devon. "We'll be deciding the disciplinary measures internally, but Mr. Blackwood has full say in how we proceed today." The flight attendant's eyes flicked nervously to Devon. He realized in that moment the extent of his power. He had the ear of the board. He had a significant contract in negotiation. It was within his grasp to end their careers with a single statement. And part of him wanted to. Yet an uneasy feeling tugged at his heart. Should he stoop to their level of callousness, or was there a more constructive path? Still, the humiliation he'd endured burned hot. Devon turned to the group. "How many years have you each worked for British Airways?" Catherine swallowed. 20 years, sir," Jacob said. 7 years. Carla answered. 5 years. Nish mumbled. 3 years. Devon breathed slowly, his heart pounding. "I want to make something crystal clear. That flight was supposed to be my time to relax before a major business deal. Instead, I was singled out, lied to, and made to feel less than. Regardless of whether it was racially motivated or due to misguided prioritization, it's unacceptable in a premium cabin or any cabin. And by the way, I'm not just some random passenger. I'm the CEO of Astrovale Technologies, the company you'll soon rely on for your advanced connectivity. Let that sink in." Catherine's face paled. Jacob's eyes widened. Carla's lips quivered, tears threatening to spill. Nish looked positively mortified. Margaret and the other executives studied Devon, waiting for his verdict. He inhaled. "I'm afraid this kind of behavior can't be tolerated if British Airways wants to move forward in partnership with me. I'm giving you all a direct demonstration that no passenger, no matter their race or background, deserves to be demeaned. Therefore, I'm requesting that your employment be terminated immediately." A hush descended, so quiet one could hear the distant hum of the building's ventilation. Catherine's mouth opened in shock. Carla let out a small gasp as tears slipped down her cheeks. Jacob stared at Devon, disbelief etched across his face. Margaret gave a firm nod. "I'll see to it, Devon. Effective immediately, your request will be honored." The flight attendants began to protest, but Margaret raised a hand, silencing them. She guided them to the door with a swift, no-nonsense motion. Security would be informed. It was a jarring moment to witness a group of uniformed attendants, once so confident in their domain at 35,000 feet, ushered out into an uncertain future. Devon watched them go, conflicting emotions roiling within. He felt a sense of vindication. A measure of control wrested back from a scenario where he'd been belittled. But beneath that was also a pang of sorrow. He wasn't a vindictive man by nature, and firing 4 people in one sweep weighed heavily on his conscience. Could they learn from this? Would they reflect, or would they simply blame him? Still, the moment had passed. The wheels were in motion. The British Airways executives rushed in with damage control, offering apologies and promises of change. They ushered Devon into a celebratory lunch, presenting him with the finalized contract for the satellite communication systems. The signing was swift. Despite the tension, it made financial sense for both sides. After a flurry of handshakes, Devon left the waterside campus. 3 days later, Devon's victory felt hollow. Sure, the contract with British Airways was enormous. Shareholders in Astrovale rejoiced, and the media buzzed about the synergy between the airline giant and the innovative tech firm. But inside Devon's Manhattan penthouse, he wasn't celebrating. He read message after message on social media. Devon Blackwood humiliates low-paid workers because they forgot his dinner choice. Typical elitist behavior. Billionaire outraged about a meal, fires entire crew. Overreaction or justified? Where's compassion? Everyone makes mistakes. Some tweets applauded Devon's stand against discrimination. Others lambasted him for destroying livelihoods over a perceived slight. The press had gotten wind of the incident, and the story took on a life of its own. British Airways issued a carefully worded statement about their commitment to ensuring a fair and equitable experience for all passengers. They confirmed staff had been dismissed following a breach of company policy. But for many, especially on social media, the soundbite was insufficient. People yearned for nuance. Devon scrolled through comments, feeling his chest tighten. In an era where public opinion could sway drastically in minutes, he was now demonized in certain corners as a petty billionaire who punished a few flight attendants for a minor meal issue. Some said he had let power go to his head. Others said he should have simply accepted the airline's apologies and not pushed for terminations. But perhaps the most unsettling blow came when investors in Astro Vale started questioning Devon's temperament. A board member privately expressed concerns. "We support you, but you know how PR can be, especially if the narrative turns you into the villain." As the online narrative evolved, more details surfaced. The flight attendants spoke to a tabloid about being fired on the spot. They admitted wrongdoing, but also claimed Devon's response was disproportionate. Carla, in a tearful interview, said, "I have 2 children, and I've never been written up before. Now, I'm out on the street for one mistake." Catherine lamented her 2 decades of service to the airline. "I was 1 year away from retirement," she sobbed on camera. "I served so many passengers with dedication, but one slip-up, and I'm gone." It stung Devon to watch. He'd witnessed more blatant discrimination in his life, times when there was no recourse, no accountability for the perpetrators. And now, ironically, he was being painted as the heartless tyrant. The complexity weighed on him. Yes, he believed in consequences for unfair treatment, especially if it was racially motivated. But had he set in motion a chain of events that was too harsh, too final? PR teams for Astro Vale scrambled to contain the damage. They released a statement clarifying Devon's position. Mr. Blackwood remains committed to an equitable and fair environment for travelers and employees alike. The decision to part ways with the British Airways crew was reached in consultation with the airline, following a pattern of unacceptable behavior. Still, the story wouldn't die. The tabloids spun angles suggesting Devon had overstepped. Some voices in the black community argued that an apology and serious anti-bias training for the crew might have been a more powerful statement than mass firings. Others praised Devon for taking a strong stance. The debate raged, fueled by talk show hosts and celebrities weighing in. Even politicians used the story as a talking point, either championing employee rights or lauding Devon's stand against racial inequities. Days blurred into nights. Devon's phone rang incessantly with reporters seeking comment or well-meaning friends offering advice. He found solace in private dinners with close confidants, one of whom was a civil rights advocate named Dr. Monique Jacobs. She'd been a mentor to Devon in his early career, teaching him how to navigate power and prejudice. They met at a quiet restaurant overlooking the Hudson. After ordering, Monique leaned in and said, "Devon, you know I love you like family, but is there any chance you might reconsider what happened on that flight?" Devon sighed. "Monique, they humiliated me. They discriminated against me, no question in my mind. And given my position with the airline, I wanted to make an example that no one, black or otherwise, should be treated like that." She tapped her manicured nails on the table, considering his words carefully. "I understand. And I agree that prejudice has no place anywhere. But do you think you've allowed them a path to understanding, to change their ways? Or did you just drop the guillotine?" Her question stung. He'd spent days grappling with that exact thought. "I wanted them to feel the consequences," he replied, voice taut. She nodded. "Sometimes consequences are necessary, but remember, your power has real impact on lives. We fight for the empowerment of the underrepresented. True empowerment means setting an example of accountability, yes, but also of growth, learning, and second chances, especially for the less privileged." She paused. "Don't let your righteous anger overshadow the possibility that people can evolve if given the opportunity." Devon stared at his plate in silence. Her words slipped into his mind like water into parched soil. Later that night, he found himself awake at 3 a.m., replaying the conversation. By firing the crew on the spot, had he effectively become the oppressor in another sense? Determined not to let the narrative spin without closure, Devon arranged a press conference. Astrovale's Manhattan headquarters hosted the event. The media swarmed in with cameras, microphones, and questions at the ready. He stood behind a sleek podium, wearing a crisp navy suit and a solemn expression. "Good morning, everyone," he began, scanning the crowd. "I want to address the incident aboard British Airways Flight BA-178, in which I was denied a first-class meal and experienced discriminatory treatment. In response, I requested the dismissal of the flight attendants involved. Let me be clear. I believe in accountability for prejudice, whether overt or subtle. No one should be made to feel disrespected because of who they are." Flashes flickered around him, cameras capturing every angle. A hush of anticipation fell over the room. Devon continued. "However, upon reflection and after conversations with respected mentors, friends, and my own conscience, I've realized something crucial. Accountability can come in more forms than immediate termination. Growth requires the opportunity to learn. The flight attendants have families, responsibilities. While I maintain that what they did was wrong, I question whether a punitive approach is the best solution." A murmur fluttered across the reporters. They leaned in closer. "I have spoken with British Airways senior management," Devon went on. "I have asked them to consider offering the 4 dismissed flight attendants an alternative path. A thorough anti-bias retraining program, public service, and restitution in the form of involvement in BA's new diversity initiatives. If they complete these programs and demonstrate genuine growth, I believe they deserve a second chance." The crowd stirred with surprise. One journalist raised his voice. "Are you saying you're reversing your decision to fire them?" Devon pressed his lips into a thin line. "Let's be clear. I requested their termination in the heat of my justifiable anger, but I also believe in second chances. The ultimate decision still rests with British Airways. My personal recommendation, however, is not to cast these individuals aside, but to bring them to a place of responsibility and empathy." Another journalist piped up. "What about the contract with British Airways? Are you still proceeding?" He nodded. "Yes, Astrovale's contract with BA for advanced satellite communications stands. The partnership remains intact, but it's now augmented by a formal agreement on diversity and inclusion training across the airline staff. We're working with BA to ensure no passenger experiences what I did." The press clamored with questions. Devon took a few more, emphasizing that this wasn't about weakness or a backtrack on fighting discrimination. It was about forging a more constructive approach that valued both justice and redemption. News traveled fast. Within hours, Carla, Catherine, Jacob, and Nish heard about Devon's press conference. Initially, they were skeptical. Why would the man who'd had them fired suddenly push for a second chance? But soon, BA's management confirmed it. Each of them was invited to enroll in a rigorous retraining program led by diversity experts, behavior psychologists, and even community leaders. If they completed the program successfully, they could reapply for positions within BA, with the possibility of returning to flight duties or being reassigned. Catherine, still raw with bitterness, hesitated. She felt humiliated by the entire ordeal, especially after 20 years of service. But faced with early retirement and a tarnished record, she decided to swallow her pride and sign up. Carla, tearful about providing for her children, embraced the program wholeheartedly, determined to rectify her mistakes. Jacob, initially resentful, recognized the chance to salvage his career. Nish, the youngest, felt relief more than anything. 3 years in, he didn't want his entire professional life derailed by one incident. In the weeks that followed, the flight attendants attended workshops dissecting stereotypes and biases. They participated in group discussions, role-playing exercises, and volunteer work in underserved communities. They wrote reflective essays on the impact of discrimination and the importance of empathy. Slowly, they confronted their own prejudices and the flawed corporate culture that had enabled their actions. Simultaneously, BA announced a broader overhaul in employee training. They launched an initiative called Fly Fair, championing equal treatment for all passengers, regardless of race, status, or background. Astrovale sponsored technology for virtual reality modules that simulated real-life scenarios, aiming to help flight crews practice fair service under various stress conditions. A few months later, Devon found himself flying again, this time from London back to New York. The airline, of course, was British Airways. He didn't know if any of the flight attendants from that fateful incident had completed the program yet, and he didn't particularly expect to run into them. But life is full of twists. As he settled into his first-class seat, this time with no illusions about the privileges he was due, he scrolled through a few emails on his phone. Moments later, the new in-flight service manager, a woman named Teresa, arrived to greet him warmly. She introduced a junior attendant assisting her. When Devon glanced up, he froze. It was Nish, the very same young man who'd looked mortified that day. His name tag was the same, but now his face bore a determined calm. "Good evening, Mr. Blackwood," Nish said, voice trembling slightly with nerves. "Welcome aboard. May I get you something to drink?" Devon studied him, noticing the tension in his shoulders. He could tell Nish was bracing for either an outburst or some harsh words. Instead, Devon smiled. "Champagne would be nice. Thank you." With a grateful nod, Nish retreated to the galley, returning shortly with a crisp flute of champagne. Devon took it, raising it slightly. "Cheers," he said softly, meeting Nish's eye. Nish offered a faint smile of relief. I want to say thank you, Mr. Blackwood. We learned a lot these past few months. I'm not the same person I was on that flight, and I promise you'll have a great experience today." Devon inclined his head. "I'm glad to hear that. We all have room to grow." For the rest of the flight, Devon was treated with the courtesy befitting a first-class passenger. But more than that, he sensed genuine respect, not the superficial veneer. Nish seemed to be trying hard to prove himself. Devon, in turn, felt a quiet contentment that he'd chosen a path allowing for redemption rather than simple punishment. Months rolled into years. Astrovale blossomed into a household name, not just for its tech innovations but also for championing fair and equitable corporate practices. British Airways continued to refine its training and customer service protocols, gradually shedding the pockets of bias that had once tarnished their reputation. As for Devon, he carried the memory of that humiliating flight as both a scar and a catalyst. Scar because it reminded him that racism could appear in the most unexpected places, even behind polite smiles in a luxury cabin. Catalyst because it pushed him to use his influence decisively, not just to punish, but to create tangible avenues for societal change. He never forgot the emotional weight of firing the crew on the spot, nor the lessons gleaned from Monique's counsel. In boardrooms, conferences, and keynote speeches, he spoke openly about the incident. He talked about how he nearly chose a path of total destruction for those who harmed him, but in the end, found greater power in offering a path to redemption. His stance became a case study in leadership seminars, how authority can be used to rebuild rather than solely to tear down. Occasionally, critics still labeled him as impulsive or overbearing, pointing to the flight fiasco. But for those who dug deeper, the story became one of introspection, the complexities of corporate culture, and the power of second chances. Catherine, Carla, Jacob, and Nish eventually re-entered British Airways in different capacities, some as ground staff, others in new flight routes, armed with newfound humility and a sharpened awareness of biases. Devon emerged stronger, with a nuanced view of the interplay between justice and mercy. He remained a staunch advocate for those who face discrimination daily, but he also championed programs that educate and reform, because he understood that the line between the oppressor and the oppressed can sometimes blur under the harsh light of real-world consequences. Life doesn't always paint villains and heroes in bold, obvious strokes. Sometimes the lines between justice and vengeance blur, And our truest power lies in granting opportunities for genuine transformation. Devin Blackwood discovered that a single act, like firing an entire crew, can echo far beyond the moment, shaping destinies and sparking personal reckonings. Yet from that turning point emerged lasting lessons: the necessity of speaking out against discrimination and the importance of second chances. Thank you for joining us on this journey into power, prejudice, and redemption. If this story gripped your heart and made you reflect on fairness and compassion, don't forget to hit that like button, share with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more dramatic stories that inspire change. Your support means everything, and together we can keep pushing for a world where justice and empathy go hand in hand. Safe travels, everyone.